So in the last section, we went over an overview of how we're going to build a blog. And in the following sections, we will actually build a blog. So let's begin by creating a new directory which will hold all of our components for our blog. And we can just call it blog, and it will be in the root source directory. And we can begin with the addpost.js component. So in our blog directory, let's create a new file called addpost.js. So we can begin with our imports. So we need React and component from React because this is going to be a class component. We also need Axios to make our requests. We need our history utility. And since it's a post, we're going to use a stylized form field so we can get text field from Material UI. We need connect from React Redux. So let's begin. Let's create a class of addpost. And we can just start it off with an empty div. And then let's start off with a form with an onSubmit event, and it takes a function of this.handleSubmit, and we'll set up this function after setting up the form. And then we need our first text field, which will be the title of the post, and this can be text field, and then it takes 3 attributes of ID, which is title, label, which is also title, and then margin of normal. And then let's create a BR to line break, and then we'll need a second text field, and this is going to be ID of body, label of body, and we also have to specify multi-line and rows of 4, since this is a text box. And finally, we need a submit button, and then after that we can close the form. And then let's also have a cancel button that will go back to the forum if a user wants to cancel adding a post. Great, so our render method is now done, and we can move on to the functions. And let's start off with handle submit. So let's start it off as an arrow function, and then remember to pass in the event keyword. And the first thing we need to do is event.preventDefault. And again, since this is React, we don't want the browser to reload when the user submits a form. So this is essentially preventing the browser from reloading when a user submits a post. And next we're going to need the user ID of the user that submitted this post. And again, this is not something they're going to submit with the form, so we need to get it from our Redux. So let's go to the bottom of our file and declare the map state to props. So let's set a property of dbProfile and then set it to state.authReducer.dbProfile. And remember, this dbProfile is something we set up already in the auth reducer. So that's where the profile is coming from. And also note that this dbProfile is different than the profile property we also set up in the auth reducer. The profile property contains the user profile data from auth0, but we need the user ID, and auth0 does not give us the user ID. So this is why we need the dbProfile, so the database profile, which does have the user ID. And remember, the database is just the PSQL database we set up in the previous section. And back in our addpost.js file, remember to do export default and then connect map state to props with the addpost component. And remember, we set our user ID to this.props.dbProfile 0 because it's returned to us as an array, and then .userID. And we also need our username, which we can access in the same exact way. So let's now combine all of our data into one object. So let's declare const data and then set it to a JavaScript object of title, body, username, and UID. And title and body are coming from our form, and then username and UID are just the variables we just set up. And remember, since it's a form, it's event.target.title.value and event.target.body.value. And now for our Axios post request, and this is what's going to send our data from our front end to our Express server, which is then going to save it in our database. So we do axios.post and then /API/post and then post to DB. And our second argument is just the data const that we just set up. We do a .then call right after this Axios request. And it is a post, so we're not getting anything from the database, but we're still going to get our status code. So we need to know if our response worked. Then we just do the .catch with the error. And finally, we want to redirect the user when they add a post. And if you didn't do this, it would look very off when a user submitted the post. Because remember, we're doing event.prevent default. So when a user hits submit, nothing would happen. So to sort of mimic a regular form submit in regular non-single page application apps, we do a set timeout. And again, I mean, you can try this yourself, but if you don't have a set timeout method, the user will just submit a post and seemingly nothing will happen. So that's why we have it here. And we can set it to 700 milliseconds. And this is it. This is all we had to do to set up our add post component. In the next section, we'll set up our post.js component, which will display all the posts and function as our main forum.